Lauren, hi, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So, first question. When you look back at your running career, what is the memory that stands out the most for you?
I think learning how to run as a high schooler, I just have like a montage of scenes of running around my hometown with a whole like gaggle of young people, our mixed team of girls and boys. And that's how I really got to know the place that I lived was through running.
And when did you start to take it seriously and think, okay, this is something that I'm actually going to focus on and build into a career?
Well, the high school system was pretty strong, and we had a very strong high school team. It was like a popular sport to do where I grew up. So as soon as I realized I had any potential. I think I was 3rd place in my first race, which was all just freshmen, ninth graders. I was 3rd and it's like, "Oh, okay, I guess I can be pretty good at this because I just started learning how to do it recently." And then I got really determined to train and just see how good I could become.
And then you mentioned just there that you started off and it was like mixed teams, boys and girls together. And having read your book, I really enjoyed it. And one thing that stood out to me was suddenly you were running with the boys and you were racing with the boys, and then you hit puberty. And suddenly there's this distance that you just can't keep up to the same extent. And I think females who have gone through sport, endurance sport particularly, will all see the gap that some boys don't understand because they all are trying so hard. Can you just talk me through that mental process of suddenly having this massive change?
Well, yeah, because there's no sex-based differences in sport before puberty. So up until about age 12 and a half, girls and boys can run alongside each other, jump as high, jump as far, throw as far, all that kind of stuff if you have equal preparation and genetic kind of um, predispositions and whatever. But then, yeah, puberty sends us on these two different paths. And male puberty is this linear path, much more linear, where you get out what you put in, and with effort comes results. And then the female puberty timeline, we still improve over time for sure. And our strongest selves are in our woman bodies. But there is a period of time where we improve at a much slower rate, and then we plateau for a little while or even get a little bit worse performances in the short term, and then it swings back up. And so I call that the female performance wave. But nobody had explained it to me. No one prepped me for that. So I was used to my child body keeping up with anyone in my neighborhood, anyone in my school. And it was very disheartening to have this take me by surprise, especially during a time in history we're very lucky to be in, where you hear messages as girls like, you can do anything, you can do anything your male peers can do. There's nothing stopping you anymore. And then you're like, wait a minute, but what about this? If you didn't mention this.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? Because I feel like even in the last decade, there's been a lot more like reassurance for girls. Like, it's okay, you're going through this. We're all going through it together. It's normal. There is a difference. But I guess there wasn't really that sort of belief when you were going through it. So it must have been really difficult not having that support system and people talking about it.
Yeah, well, it was just talked about like a death sentence. And to be honest, at least in the US, it hasn't changed in any significant way. People reading my book that I hear from still today, like young people who read it or say this is the same now. Puberty is viewed as like an injury that a female athlete can't come back from. It's it's approached with dread for a lot of female athletes, like, "Well, what's gonna happen to my body? Am I going to be built for this sport anymore after these changes that I have no control over?" Or they'll try to assert control over those changes as a way to hang on to, their child body as long as they can, or to minimize the amount of changes through diet restriction or, other things. So, yeah, it's still very much present, and if we don't explain to coaches and parents and all the people involved in young female athletes' lives, this is a normal progression. This is what it looks like when you zoom out. Then it will continue to be viewed with dread, and we'll continue to see these higher rates of eating disorders, stress fractures, decreased mental health all of those things female athletes are experiencing at higher rates than their male peers. Even today, the research is still current, are because we're viewing their puberty as a negative, and we're exerting pressures on them, and they're exerting pressures on themselves to follow a more male pathway of improvement. It doesn't really fit their physiology.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because boys and girls through, we call it primary school in the UK. So I guess when they're little and they're going through PE, like physical education, they're playing together, they're doing sports. And then suddenly it's very stark with girls. They just don't want to do sport. And even if they are active in sport, you hear of a lot of people age, 15, 16 quitting sport, even if they have been competing to a professional, or not professional level,
Mhm.
but very competitive level. Why do you think that is at that stage?
Yeah, well, we lose half of girls who have been participating in sport. We lose half of them by age 17. And this is like a global phenomenon in countries where girls are being given access to sport, right? There's still a huge problem globally of girls not even getting access to sport. But in places where we are, we're still losing them. We're losing them in a 2-to-1 ratio of boys dropping out of sport, sometimes 3-to-1. And the Women's Sports Foundation has a whole bunch of research as to why that is. And they name all kinds of reasons that are valid. They include like not having enough role models. Homophobia is still a concern, believe it or not, in this day and age, that girls feel like it's not something they can do and still be considered feminine, that they're worried they'll be considered gay or masculine or something that makes it harder for them to be viewed as a potential like mate or like date or something like that. And that's hard for me to believe, but it is still a very present thing. There's also worse facilities for female athletes and male athletes that are discouraging, or they get worse times to get access to fields than the boys' teams, or they have to travel farther. And then there's also still compliance issues within the United States. You have something called Title IX that mandate that girls get the same access that boys get in any sport, where federal money is contributing to the school. And so, but that's still not happening. There's still only like 9 out of 10 schools are compliant with that. So in some cases, they still just don't have the access. But what isn't mentioned on their website is puberty. And this is like the most essential, widespread one, is that you can watch any girl developing. And once her body starts to change, she's moving through space in a different way. The physics, the biomechanics, everything is different. Activities that used to feel light and free and buoyant suddenly don't. And we aren't talking about it because those body changes are sexualized. Like breast development is the first sign of puberty. Comes about 18 months to 2 years before the first period. And anyone that's developed breast knows that it changes how you move. It changes how you feel in your body. It changes how you're looked at. And there's a huge amount of self-consciousness. Research out of the UK shows that concerns around breasts, breast movement, breasts in sport is a huge deterrent for girls during puberty to continue participating in sport.
I think it's really strange that women have breasts. Okay, that is something that we have to deal with. Different sizes, but when we are running, there's a gravity issue here. But sports bras and the importance of sports bras for the scientific protection of our bodies is not something that is widely discussed. It's not discussed how important having a highly supportive sports bra is to protect your chest, to
Yes,
protect it for
absolutely.
long term throughout your life. It's not just like I can get a cute little Lululemon number that's suitable for yoga. You need a high supportive sports bra, and people don't talk about it, and they don't
Yeah.
make pretty ones.
No, and it is essential to continuing to feel confident in moving your body through space. And so for when you think about the incredible discomfort and self-consciousness of the middle school kid, right? Like a 10 to 13-year-old girl, the self-consciousness comes pouring in around that age. And if over half of girls don't own a sports bra once they've developed breasts, I mean, that's crazy. It should be part of mandatory equipment that's provided. I mean, if a school or physical education program is going to provide a jersey and shorts, they should be providing a really good sports bra as well. This should be mandatory equipment, like a jock strap is on the boys, or like mouth guards are in sports that require that. But the fact that it's been overlooked entirely shouldn't be a surprise, right? Like that's why we have these problems. Things that are female specific, female specific needs are so often overlooked in everything from sports bras to places to nurse to Like it follows you through your whole life cycle.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So I want to talk to you about your personal journey through running. So you started running, you went through school being competitive, getting more and more competitive. You went through puberty in that stage. And I said to you just before we started recording that I've read your book and I really enjoyed it. But for people who have not read your book yet, because I think everyone should, who is listening to this, can you give a little overview on that journey that led you to becoming a professional athlete?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, I was a really late bloomer. And so the whole thing of like puberty is this subject that goes through the book, this theme of what's happening to girls' bodies around me and what's happening to boys' bodies around me. And the dread that accompanies that. Since I was such a late bloomer, I didn't get my period until like the end of high school. Um, I was mostly watching the effect on others and watching them plateau or get slower, be frustrated, quit sport, or be told there was something wrong with them. Like maybe they're not motivated enough, like basically pathologizing puberty. But for me, I was still experiencing sport a lot like my male peers because puberty was delayed. So I just continued to get better and better and better. And it opened doors for me. And I didn't really experience the effects of puberty till I was competing in college, which in the United States is essentially the minor leagues of sport. It's just like such an intense program and it's very professional. And so at that time I experienced a plateau and I had gone from being like one of the most promising collegiate athletes to becoming kind of medium, and watching that promise be threatened and be taken away. And I experienced the pressures to try to lose weight and fight my body to eliminate the signs of body changes. I was never told to view those changes in any positive way. And but then luckily I had good influences in my life that helped me just ride out those changes. And I ended up improving again and landing a professional contract as an athlete with Nike. I traveled all over the world racing. I ran in multiple world championships. I never made an Olympics, which is, you'll have to read the book to see what that journey was like. But when I retired, the New York Times called me the fastest American distance runner never to make the Olympics, which is not a title anybody really wants. But that journey of not getting what I wanted, despite having incredible potential, is the story of so many girls at whatever their level of competition is. Even if you're just talking about local soccer team or softball or, netball or whatever the thing is, this potential being squashed, um, feeling mentally and emotionally crushed, discouraged, developing stories about your body that aren't true, or about your spirit, your competitiveness, your stick to itiveness. That's the reason I wanted to write the book because I felt like by telling my sports story, I could show people that millions of us are carrying around stories that are untrue about ourselves from our sports experiences, that we can retell those stories now. Like we can rewrite those stories in ourselves when we have all the information, and then we can prevent future generations of young people from developing those false stories by changing the systems that they participate in.
So when you were writing the book, there's lots of things that you cover that are good moments and less good moments throughout your life. Was it quite painful revisiting those so vividly and having to go through the whole experience almost again by writing it?
It definitely was. It was way harder than I thought it would be. When I wrote my book proposal, I was like, and then I'll write about this experience and this experience. Just
Easier in
it's
adult.
easy to stay. Yeah, it's easy to stay above the emotional tide. But yeah, once I dove in, I mean, the good and the bad. I got to ride. If you're going to write well, you're going to try to influence the emotions of the reader. Then you have to be willing to dive into those emotions again fully. And so it was quite a roller coaster. And luckily, there were lots of joyful moments to write about as well, and just falling in love with sport and movement and the relationships that you develop along the way and places you get to see and the freedom it can bring you. It's such a mix, such a beautiful, swirling mix. And how great would it be if anyone that participated in sport got so much more of the joyful part and so many fewer of the really tough part?
Exactly. And I'm interested that when you looked back, because as humans, for some reason, kind of cling to the negative parts. Do you know, if someone mentions something negatively, I guess online as well, you have quite a large social platform, and you will have people saying good things, and I assume you'll have some people saying bad things, as anyone does who puts themselves out online. Did it almost like when you went back to write your proposal for each chapter, did you write the negative things down, like remember them quickly, and then be like, "Oh, but that really happened as well, and that was actually really great, and that helped me grow and helped me turn this, and then this happened, and that was actually amazing as well." Did you find that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the whole reason why I wrote the book was to try to correct a problem in sport. So I knew I was going to have to focus quite a bit on the negative, or I'd at least have to bring that into life. And so I had fleshed that part of the story out way more than the joy part. But obviously, I did this sport my whole life and continued to choose to do it. So it was bringing me immense amounts of joy that entire time. And it was actually my editor who had to continue to work with me regularly and be like, hey, you need to put more of the joy in here. And like, we need to know, what is it you're fighting for? If you don't convey the joy and the pleasure and the magic of this well enough, then you won't be able to gather the support to correct these problems, or to even just be telling the honest truth, like to actually tell the full truth. And so that was really good to be prompted in that way. And it was essential to spend more time in that joy when trying to solve a critical issue. But anytime you're trying to solve like a systemic problem or point out a wrong, you do have to spend time being honest and negative.
I love that you use the word magic to describe sport because it does encapsulate people in that way. And I think magic is just, it's such an, yeah, just, it's such an accurate word to describe it. And I was going to ask you about the Olympics because I was going to mention in the book, you do talk about it, Olympic trials and something went wrong. And then you never actually went to the Olympics. What is the big deal about the Olympics as an athlete? What why is everyone obsessed with it? I'm saying because there's an obvious way, but I'm like, what is it? What is it?
To be honest, I've questioned it so many times because it isn't important to me now at all. And I have children and that is not a wish I have for them. Not even a tiny little wish that I would ever have for them to be an Olympian. It just seems kind of ridiculous. But I think that the thing is when you're plugging away and you're driving to be the best you can be, and there is this pinnacle of what the best is. Globally, the Olympics is recognized as the toughest competition in the world. You're competing against the best in the world. Um, and so if you're a person that's competitive and trying to be the best, I mean, that is the biggest carrot. That is the North Star. And it's also the only time the world really pays attention to a lot of smaller sports. If you're not a football player, then people aren't watching. And I mean, I could walk around in anywhere when I was a professional athlete. No one would recognize me. No one would have any idea that I was the national champion at something or seventh in the world at something, right? Like it. And so there is a craving also to have the sport you pour yourself into be more recognized, like other sports are.
I guess it is a movement. It's a global thing. Do you know, you might watch a sport you've never even thought of before. If the Olympics is in the country that you live in, you'll get tickets for anything. It doesn't matter if you've never
Yeah, it
heard of the
doesn't know.
sport before. Like,
Yes, absolutely. Like you just get to witness people who have devoted their lives to something. It's almost like a little bit of a circus of unusual talent that have been honed. And some are more fun to watch than others, but excellence is always fun to witness because you can relate to like that, putting yourself on the app, like making yourself so vulnerable, having a big dream and having the world know about it and watch you attempt it. I mean, imagine how many times in our life do we get to watch that outside of sport?
mm, I think it's the excellence of it as well. It's just amazing to see that. And that's professional sport generally, the top level of sport. And having experienced that, I want to ask you, what was it like being a Nike athlete? Everyone knows the brand Nike. Like that is surely like the top that you can get. You know, if you have like a really niche like cycling brand as a professional cyclist, people might have heard of it, but everyone's in
Yeah.
Nike.
It was a dream to run for Nike. Nike was the sponsor of my college program at Stanford, and So I was used to wearing all the gear and, of course, biggest sports brand, most recognizable sports brand. And I thought that I had these other dreams too, to try to promote women's running in particular and to try to decrease eating disorders in sport and make it a healthier sport. And so I thought, well, if I can sign with Nike, then that's a sport that could put some money behind these passions too. And I assumed that they would share the same passions that I did for making sport healthier for the next generation of girls. But that was where the discouraging part came from, was that I found that they weren't interested in that and they weren't wanting to put any money behind it or energy behind it, which was just, when you know someone can and is resourced enough to do it, and then they just turn away from something that you see harming so many people, that changed the way I viewed my relationship with them, and I became interested in moving on to a different brand. But
Which
I
is
was with them for almost a decade.
kind of crazy that you say, I was looking to move on from it because, as you say, it is the most recognized sports brand in the world. Yet, I remember it. I think in your book, you're talking about you had a conversation like with someone really high up in Nike about it. They just didn't care. And
Yeah,
now the world cares. Social media cares. They're all pushing for it. So, have you seen that change?
absolutely. The things that I was fighting to change with the power of social media and just for them to really know that people care about this. You better do it or your profits will suffer. Then they do it. And that's the reality of most businesses.
So, I want to ask you about the perfect 5,000-meter race. Start to finish, talk me through it.
It actually happened in London. I had a race where I just felt good the entire time, and that never happened to me. People call it flow or whatever. I'm sure I found flow in other ways, but um, I tended to have to grind through at least half of every 5K race and dig deep into my toughness and have like arguments with myself. And, it's torture. But this one wasn't like that. So I would go out the first mile or so, trying to stay as relaxed as I could, trying to be as efficient as I could with my movements. And most importantly, trying to keep my mind in like a calm place where I wasn't really thinking about racing. You don't want to be racing the entire 5K. You want to be running a big part of it and then turn on your racing brain, which activates like all the competitive hormones and adrenaline, and all those things. They can't last for the whole distance. You don't want to activate those until later in the race. And then the middle of the race, when it starts to hurt more and you aren't relaxed anymore, that's when you want to have some positive mantras that you can get excited about and just trying to stay connected to the athletes you hope to be racing at the end, just staying connected, staying where your feet are. And then ideally in the perfect race, you're just chomping at the bit. You cannot wait for the moment that you have decided you're going to make your finishing kick. And I always decided that before the race even started. Um, at 600 meters to go or 500 meters to go, I will make my finishing kick. The only exception being if someone else does it sooner that I want to try to beat, then I have to match their move. But generally, no one wanted to start kicking 600 meters out. And so I would get to be the one that made the move. And on a good day, you just feel like a loaded spring right before that moment. And you just shoot out and try to make it as decisively as you can so that you're very difficult to catch. And then I would just run like hell and try to put as much space between me and the pack as I could and challenge myself never to look back and just to look forward and ask myself, am I running as fast as I can? Is this the most I can do? And if the answer to that is yes, then there's no point looking back. Just keep looking forward.
600 meters out of a 5,000-meter race. That's quite a long time.
It is fun to be going full gas. You guarantee you're going to feel like a ton of bricks on your back sometime in the last half of the last lap, and that you're going to need to run through Vic mud and maintain your positivity while doing it.
And with the ladies that you were racing against, what was the relationship with that? Because female friendships are an interesting topic, especially within sport, because you're supposed to be friends with your teammates, but then you're also competing against them. What was that dynamic like in your experience?
It was easiest to be friends with the athletes from other countries. Some of my closest friends were Irish and from New Zealand, Australia, England, and a little bit tougher with the athletes from your own country because you don't train together usually. Um, and you're pitted against each other for limited resources. And that's another thing that could be changed and is different in other sports, like football, basketball. You have like league minimums. You know you're going to make at least a minimum amount, and that amount is enough to like live on and save and all that kind of stuff. But in my sport and most Olympic sports, it's not like that. It's like there's only enough room for a couple people at the top. And if you're not one of them, you're struggling. You can lose your contract. I mean, all that. So I'd say maintaining a friendship under those circumstances, whether it's sport or any other career, is difficult.
And then I guess it's quite difficult to know who to speak to in those situations as well when things are tough because it is lonely being in competitive sport and elite sport. And you need to be careful who you open up to because if it's your teammates, you're showing weaknesses. If it's your coaches, you're giving them reasons not to select you. It's a very difficult dynamic. And I think
Yeah.
people are a lot more open about it now, about mental health in sport and the pressure that people are put under because, as you say, there's only so many people who can make a living out of it.
It's true, and that's why it's so important to have relationships outside of sport. People that know you and your identity beyond how fast you can run or far you can throw or whatever. And also professionals in mental health. That having someone like that on your team that you can rely on is huge. And then I also think that like that fear of vulnerability with my competitors started to dissipate later in my career because I realized like yeah, there's this fear you're gonna give them something that they can use against you or that'll somehow give them some power, but I actually found that being vulnerable is a strength, that when somebody got to know me, it was disarming, and it you know how they say it's hard to hate people up close? Once they knew you, it was like they had a tenderness for you and you had a tenderness for them, and then you can get back to just what the job's supposed to be, which is let's see who can run the fastest on the day. It's not like we're out there like elbowing each other, and it's a non-contact sport. So it really is about what can you do today?
It's interesting because grassroots level of sport, community is everything. Do you know you've got your accountability, you've got your friends, you've got people supporting each other, and then you get to the competitive element of sport, the next level up, and then suddenly everyone's fighting for it. And then elite sport, I imagine, is like that's amplified. But that's super interesting that actually then when you become friends with the people in the inner circle, when you're at the pinnacle of the sport, you actually relax. You are
Yeah.
comfortable with each other. So it goes through it. You've got to go through the like elbows out phase to like get into the flow of it.
Yeah, I think that if more younger athletes in competitive sport knew the benefits of loosening up around each other and just knowing that, like, especially the more competitive you are, your time is very dominated by that sport or activity. You don't have a ton of time for outside friendships, or if you travel a lot, like maintaining close relationships with people back home when you're traveling a lot. You know, you miss weddings, you miss important birthdays, important events all the time. And so developing a closeness and vulnerability with the people doing the same job you do, even if you're competing against one another, is critical for like mental health and enjoyment. And I remember a few races really vividly, but I remember a lot more like the training runs and track workouts that I would do sometimes with my competitors when we would travel the world. We needed a track in Belgium and hash out our toughest workout of the year. And yeah, we were showing each other our cards of how fast we were at that moment about 5 days before we were going to go race each other. But the alternative is doing those workouts completely alone with no coach present, no one to cheer for you, and just grinding it out solo. And most athletes will come to the conclusion pretty soon that like it's better to do this together and show each other what we've got, and then go race because we're not just racing each other, we're racing the rest of the world. So, you know, the rising tide will lift both of our boats and then we can get out there. And that happened definitely. There was one athlete in particular, Kim Smith from New Zealand, who I write about in the book, that we developed this great relationship of working together and then going into races and finishing first and second. Or, you know, I would be genuinely happy for her when she won if I didn't win, as long as I also had a good day.
Yeah, I love that you say the rising tide will lift both of our boats. I think that's really, yeah, it shows what it can be as well. Do you know? But you have to make the effort to be bonding with people as well, which is really special when it gets done right.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, in 2011, you came seventh in the World Champs, which you mentioned earlier. This is for the 5 kilometer race. Insane result, your best result in that race. And then you decide, okay, 5K, I've nailed this. I'm going to go and run a marathon. Can you talk me through that?
Yeah, well, there were a couple factors. One of them was money. So marathon pays and track and field doesn't. And you get paid to even just show up to a marathon if you have built a brand and name for yourself in sport, especially for your debut marathon. And so there was that factor, this promise, this carrot hanging in front of me. And then there was the fact that I was in the shape of my life when I was seventh in the world. And with 2.5 laps to go in a 5K, so the race is we're already 10 laps in. So I was with the gold medalist. I was right next to her with only 2.5 laps to go. And then the entire pack of, I think there were actually seven, four Ethiopians and three Kenyans, blasted away from me, and I could not match their speed. I was in the shape of my life. I managed to reel one of them in on the final straightaway to get seventh place. But when I was thinking, okay, a year from now is the Olympics, how in the hell am I going to get a different result than I got today? How am I going to develop the level of strength so that when I get to 2.5 laps to go, I feel like it's been a walk in the park? Because that's clearly how they feel, because they were able to take off at a speed that I could not even imagine. And so the idea of running a marathon and building an incredible base, that's what athletes in Ethiopia and Kenya are notorious for, building huge bases from childhood, just putting in lots of miles. And that's something that I never did. As a 5K runner, I focused a lot more on track workouts and stuff. And I had never gave myself the opportunity to dedicate a large chunk of time to just building endurance. And so I thought, well, what do I have to lose? I mean, maybe I had to lose the a chance at making the Olympics, but I'd also been in the sport long enough where I knew if I don't make the Olympics, that's not the end of the world. I'll be okay. If I go to the Olympics, I want to try to win a medal at the Olympics. It wasn't just about getting there. I wanted to be able to represent my country well and take a shot at the top of the podium. And so I risked it. I risked it by training for that marathon, and it went really well until it didn't.
Yeah, no spoilers. No spoilers. Um, so when you're describing it, it's so vivid and it feels like this could have been a month ago that you're describing it. You remember exactly what happened. And this is 2011. And of course, you write in the book about the early 2000s as well, when you grew up running. How did you remember all of the details about what happened?
Yeah. Well, the best I could think, because I read a lot of memoir too, and I often find myself wondering this. The times when the amygdala in the brain is activated is when our memories are laid down the most in the most detail. And so those are times when you're afraid or when you're like in extreme joy. Like it's this elevated state of awareness. And so competition is filled with a good amount of fear and anxiety, and those are times when you're really paying attention, or times when you're having a fight where you have to like, fight or flight, get up for an argument, or when you feel threatened or whatever. So I think that helped me memorize a lot of detail. And then there's also this the fallibility of memory. That's the best that I could remember it, but memory is what happened plus every time you remembered it since that changes the memory. And so you never really know how accurate your memory is unless you have a videotape of it, and nobody goes around recording their whole life, right? But it feels as honest and as it could possibly be. And it was fun to recall a lot of those memories. And I think anybody who's a writer will know of memoir, especially if you give yourself the space to dive into a memory and you do a lot of free writing about it, which is not the finished product, right? That you read in a book. You're just free writing sensory detail from something. Then more of it comes back to you and more of it comes back to you. And then you end up with this very rich moment.
It's fascinating just hearing you talk about like how the brain works in your experience as well, how you heighten your awareness when you go into sport because you have that fight or flight. Then when you're writing memories down, they're all in there, they come back, they flow back. And it must have been amazing to push your body as obviously your body physically, but your mind to the limits where you knew that, hey, do you know what? I'm running as fast as I can and I'm in the shape of my life. And you know you've hit the limit. But to actually do that, not many people can say that they actually, like with confidence, that they actually reached that limit of what they
Mhm.
could do, which is pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. I'm really glad I did that for a phase of my life, and I'm also really glad I'm not doing that anymore, and I think that that's
Something
the
like
gift
sustainable.
of yeah, but that's the gift of professional sport for culture and society is that you get to watch other people do it. I don't it like, I don't know that I would recommend that everybody go out there and drive themselves into the ground to find out what they're physically capable of. Like, looking back on it, it was really rewarding, and it was like an elevated way of living for sure, a very rich way to live as far as emotions go. Um, but you do get a lot of it from watching sport. If you care about your local team, if you care about your kid or you care about your community or whatever it is, or you watch the Olympics, like you get little bits of that. You get to see what the human body is capable of, the human spirit, the human mind, and we are all connected. Like that is what he or she can do in the Olympics is a reflection on you, right? Because we were part of the human race.
And it's really interesting because we see the Olympics, we see the elite sport, and we watch these amazing athletes at the top of their game, and their bodies are in the shape of their life in terms of athletic performance. How do we see that, acknowledge that, admire that, and then channel that into inspiration for the younger generations who perhaps they're girls who maybe go to the gym because they think girls go to the gym, but they actually just sit in their phone or they haven't found their movement. How do we channel that into inspiring people?
Gosh, I don't know. I don't know how to give anybody else motivation, to be honest. I think if you find a type of movement that you genuinely like, that's what I would encourage young people to do. Is as a parent, I encourage my kids to try all kinds of different sports and activities, and then and my co-parent, we encourage our kids by just saying movement should be part of your life, some kind of movement. Like that's a healthy life, like brushing your teeth and taking your showers and having friendships and stretching your mind. Like these are part of life, and we don't push anyone's sport over another. And then our hope, and you know, I'm not a professional parent, so I don't know, but the hope is that they will feel like something's missing when they don't move their body. And not like you have to move it every day, but if you go through a year of your life where you don't move your body very much, I would hope they feel like something's missing and that they go, "Oh, I know where to look to fix this. I need to find another type of movement that is good to me." And I'm in that stage now. I only exercised maybe twice a week in the whole last year. I was going through a lot of life changes and my iron was low. And now that I'm not a professional athlete, I don't watch every health marker with like a hawk. And so I'm needing to rediscover in my 40s how to incorporate movement on a more frequent basis just to be able to have good mental health, have my arteries not get clogged up, like that kind of thing to make sure that I can age, be an old person that has good mobility because I continued to move through middle age. Like those are the things that motivate me now. And it's a matter of just saying, I don't need to drive myself to run every day if that's not what I want to do. But the whole world of movement is available to me. What do I want to do?
Hmm. Yeah. And how did you know it was the right time to retire?
I think that when I felt like it wasn't bringing me any value to chase that dream anymore. Because you can be going through adversity, but chasing the dreams still fills you up in a way that is net positive. But it was no longer net positive. It was really a negative on my life. And I was becoming more and more aware of all the things I was giving up by continuing to dedicate my life to this dream. And that column was growing longer and longer of things that like sounded more appealing to me to do. And so I was just like, well, it's time.
It's time. And then when you decided, okay, this is something I'm going to stop doing, suddenly the thing you've grown up doing, it's not just a job, it's everything running. Do you know it's your what you talk about, what you do when you're not or when you're not running. You can't really do much else because you're so tired. It's not just a job, it's an identity. How did you replace that after stopping doing it at that level?
Well, I first dove into other forms of movement because I knew that running was a gateway to community as well, and I was afraid of losing community. And so I started mountain biking and cross country skiing. And those were ways that I met new friends that shared a love of movement. And it was so fun to try to learn a new sport, to be a beginner again. Like instead of like judging my improvement on this tiny 1% of like I'm
That
already
feels
99%.
10% better a
Yeah,
week or something. Yeah.
exactly. It's so cool, so fun. And then yeah, I made new friends and then that made me feel more connected to the activity because the activity was how I could see those friends more. Um, and then what was the second part of the question again? It was
How did you replace that identity? How to find yourself within that?
and then I think just the part of that identity that was I like to um master things. I could do that in anything else. So I didn't lose the mastery part of my identity when I left professional running. I started trying to become more of a writer and a student of writing and a better parent and a better partner and all those things. Like, how can I show up as my best self in the world? And when I got rid of professional running, I suddenly had so much energy to be better version of myself in all these other areas of my life. The one thing that's just coming to mind right now that I didn't mention earlier was like professional athletics did not allow me to have roots anywhere. I had to be up and leaving and disappearing to different cities and countries throughout the year.
Yeah.
And I craved community. I craved roots. I wanted a home to feel like a home. I wanted to be able to have a magazine delivery to my house and be able to read it or a newspaper, like these sort of like very simple things that a lot of people have and to be able to, yeah, show up to birthdays, weddings, and things like that for the first time in my life. It felt so rewarding. So there was this new part of my identity that I got to develop, which was like friend, neighbor, community member, and so I didn't miss the old identity when I had all these new parts of me to explore. I actually haven't missed professional running much at all.
That's super interesting, isn't it? I guess it means that you fulfilled everything that you aim to do in it. You didn't
Yeah.
leave anything on the table, which is
I think I
pretty good
definitely did
too.
my best. I certainly had goals that I didn't accomplish, but, when you realize that the goals that you set aren't the most important part of it, that there is this richer story, then yes, when I looked at the richer story, I had accomplished what I'd set out to do, and I could move on.
Yeah. When you were traveling and you were moving about all the time, what was the one thing that you had to bring everywhere to make yourself feel at home?
Books,
A book.
which you could also pick up anywhere, but I could always spend time with myself in my own company reading, and that feels the same whether you're in a hotel in London or in Brussels or on a train or at home in your bed.
Yeah. Are there any hotels that you just can't visit now? Like any specific chains that you're like, not from.
No, we've stayed in all kinds of different places, luckily. So I actually miss that because some of those hotels you would never find on TripAdvisor. It was just some local inn that the race director found and put you up in. And it was nothing that
No.
special, but they always had a lot of character.
I used to work for a cycling team and I had to do some of the bookings for that. And I remember just like phoning hotels in France, being like, hi, can I book 12 people in with 2 lorries and we need to get some water supply and electricity while trying to speak French to these people? So I'm like,
Oh, wow.
I can see that it's just these random places that you're like, okay,
Yep.
try our best. Oh gosh, amazing. And then you mentioned in your book, almost like as a side thing, you're like, oh yeah, then I started this business for it was picky bars, which was the nutrition bars. And you're just like as an aside. And then suddenly this grew into like quite a big business.
Yeah.
And you always just like mention it like, oh yeah, we just did this for my kitchen. How cool is that?
I know it is. It's really cool. It would be its own book, which I probably will never write, but the story of the entrepreneurship story behind Picky Bars is a good one for sure. but I think I brought it into the book just to show that, there is a myth in professional sport that if you have any sort of outside interest or things you're devoting your time or energy to, then it means you're not a professional. And I started Picky Bars with my, husband and friend at the time when we were all in the prime of our careers. We didn't wait until we retired, and it made us better athletes because we had an identity that wasn't based entirely on sport. It balanced us out in a way that I think provided more resilience when we were going through tough patches in sport. We had this whole other part of our identity to lean into, and, we felt like we were learning and growing and stretching as human beings, and it was just kind of a bonus that it ended up being a very successful business because we never dreamt of that. We really didn't think that that was remotely possible.
And another thing that you talk about is the Ask Lauren Fleshman blog that you started, which is kind of like the OG social media that you kind of like created. Was it a website that people could write to you with
Mhm.
questions and communicate with you on that?
Yeah, we
That
get
helped you
questions
with
submitted.
the career, your career, and like connecting with your community within running.
Well, running is the highest participatory sport in my country, but the sport of professional running is like completely obscure and nobody follows it. So that disconnect bothered me because I should theoretically feel like I'm part of this massive community of millions of people, but I didn't. And I thought that it would serve my sport of professional running to create this blog and a connection point to everyday runners by elevating our sport and giving people an in. Like maybe they just never knew a professional runner before, and now they do, and now they're discovering all these other athletes and races. And then I also thought it would serve me to feel connected to this bigger population when so much of professional running was lonely. And it also would connect me to like the type of sport I could do forever. When my fastest days were behind me, there was still this other version of the sport available to me.
Hmm. And what advice would you give to your younger self?
I would just talk to my younger self about the female performance wave. I think it would have brought me a lot of peace in knowing that being a girl isn't such a bad thing. It's just different, just because it looks different than this pathway my male peers were on that is more glorified, more celebrated, whatever. That mine looks different, but it is also really, really awesome. And if I could just help myself zoom out and see, hey, you're going to be your strongest in your 20s and 30s. In some ways, you're going to be your strongest in your 40s and 50s. In some ways, like this, despite what popular media tells you, youth is not everything. This is not your prime. Um, Let yourself ride out the tough moments with that confidence of the bigger picture.
And I think if people are listening to this and they're going through that tough time, it may not be puberty, but it may just be feeling like a slump in their sporting career, whether it's recreational or they're doing it seriously. I think being kind to yourself and letting yourself, like, give yourself grace if you don't want to train and go out in the rain during winter time. There's a lot of different things you can do inside, or you can have some time off. Like, unless it is a career, don't make it into something that is painful for you mentally, that you're punishing yourself for that, because sport is such a gift. You talked about it, like the magic of sport. It can be amazing. The friendships that you have in sport can be incredible. The opportunities, the places it takes you. So to punish yourself with that and dread it is something that's actually so sad that people kind of put on themselves to carry that.
Yeah.
So what would you say to someone who's kind of going through that slump?
Well, I would just say that sport on the whole should feed your soul. Your movement practice should feed your soul, and that doesn't mean there's not days that are tough. And some of those times, if running in the rain is really difficult to get started, but you feel amazing afterwards, well, remember that and let that help you get out the door. But if it's hard for you to get out the door and it's miserable the whole time, and the only thing you get out of it is you get to check your calendar that you did it and that you didn't like fall off the wagon or whatever or break your streak, like maybe it's time to reevaluate that. That isn't enough to feed a soul, you deserve better. And if you catch yourself talking to yourself and about yourself in a way you wouldn't talk to your best friend, And that's another sign to reevaluate what you're doing, to bring more kindness and grace to yourself in this one body, this one life that you have. You might as well have an amazing relationship with yourself.
Exactly. Probably one of the hardest relationships that we can all have is the relationship we have with ourselves. Plus, it's also so important because we can control it. We can control what we think about ourselves.
That is
So let's have grace and kindness, just as you said.
great.
Um, well, if people want to follow you online, Lauren, and keep up to date with what you're doing, access your book as well, where should they go?
LaurenFleshman.com is where you can read about the book and read some of the amazing reviews that I've gotten on that. And I'm doing a promotion of it's a group promotion, but for teams. But if a team is to buy 25 books, I'll do a 30-minute Zoom with the team. And that's just to encourage coaches and other people that work with young people to like stock up and have them on hand because it can be your first line of intervention in a female athlete's life. And also for book clubs, same thing applies. And Fleshman Flyer is my Instagram, and that's where I'm most active. And I talk about work and family, and I'm not on there a ton, but I am active on there.
I love that promotion that you came up with. That's so cool that you have this. Have you done like conversations with coaches and they're just kind of like wanting to hear what you have to say and your experience through that? That's an amazing impact that you can have.
Well, I'm just launching it now because the paperback is being released this week, and it's at a much more accessible price point for teams. And so it was a good time to launch this promotion. I'm looking forward to
Wishing
the
well.
conversations ahead. Thanks.
Yeah, incredible. That's so cool. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I will link those things in the description as well so people can check out your website and your social media. And yeah, get your book as well. I would say definitely it is worth reading if you're interested in sport, or even if you've listened to this podcast and you're not a runner and you just think, hey, I want to learn more. It's a super interesting read. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you, Lauren.
Me too. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. All the best to you.